Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Sans the beard. Bye-bye, beard. Go ahead, everybody, freak out for a second. Soak it all in. Tonight's episode, Better Angels. We want to talk about discussions about morality and morally upright characters in role-playing games. If you're a fan of the show, you want to follow us on social media. We're at SWGM Podcast on Twitter and Facebook. If you like what we do and want to throw us a buck and support the show, do so on patreon.com/SWGM podcast. We're on the YouTubes. The live stream goes behind a paywall for Patreons to get first crack at it and becomes available the following Monday on the YouTube channel under the SWGM podcast playlist. That's youtube.com/Savage Worlds GM podcast. And also the same moniker on iTunes, itunes.com/Savage Worlds GM podcast. So here to discuss moral turpitude is Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
And Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
And if you're watching the live stream and want to participate in the chat, feel free to do so. We do bring that into the show. So let's talk morality in role-playing games. What does that mean? It's been tried. We're going to also talk to about other role-playing games that have tried to do it as a enforced mechanic.
So does it mean trying to avoid murder hoboism? And is that something you really want to do because it's a role-playing game? I mean, we have this coming into play right now for something we're working on that I'm trying to wrap my head around. How are we going to make this work? The morality and the law and all of that kind of fun stuff.
So I think it really depends on the game that you're playing in, right? I think one of the major complaints about murder hoboism, quote unquote, is just that fact that the characters are completely immoral, run into a town and just slaughter everybody for no reason.
Right. See, and I don't think that that's it. I think that that's the conversation everyone has. But I don't think that's actually the problem people have with it. The real problem is that they want this highbrow experience they see when they watch Critical Role or when they read a book and they picture themselves playing that scene from the book at the game table. They want these visceral, deep, funny-voiced conversations. And what they get is, it's just a flesh wound, I kill him. And there's a lot of build-up and no payoff in that regard because you're wanting this big thing to happen, and then it doesn't happen ever. Because, for the most part, the flip side to that is there's no reason for us to engage in that. The rules don't push you to actual role play. The community doesn't push you to actual role play. You read all the Facebook posts you ever want to read, watch all the YouTube videos you ever want to watch. They'll all tell you that that's what everyone wants. But sit down at the table and play, especially at a con. And you're going to find out very quickly the average player wants to show up, roll dice, kill shit.
Yeah, because they've lived their life all week long with all these constraints and all this crap that you have to deal with in a day-to-day existence. And yeah, they just want to come in and, I mean, even not a con game, even in a regular, ongoing campaign, sometimes that's what people want. I'm finding right now that that's not what I want, and I'm really struggling in one of the games I'm in right now because it's been nothing but combat every single session, and I'm really getting bored.
So I think the new crop of games, stuff like Dungeon World, Genesis, Index Card RPG, are a nice kind of middle ground between your more traditional games like Savage Worlds, D&D, etc., and kind of the new wave, like the Fates of the world, that try to take the crunch out of the game and rely a little more heavily on storytelling, that lean towards story over game mechanics. I think you've got a decent crop of kind of these hybrids coming out. And even from what I understand, I don't want to give away anything from Suede, but there's some pretty heavy, like, story element style mechanics in Suede now that put some controls back into the player's hand, put some control back in the GM's hand to make things more narrative driven than mechanics driven. And I think that's going to be a very nice set of tools if we continue to kind of evolve as a community to use them. I think the question of morality in your game, though, is completely separate from murder hoboism, because the proper morality for a character might be to be a psychopathic killer.
Sure, it depends on what your character concept is.
Well, even beyond character concept, you might have a character that's picked up a mental illness as a hindrance. You've picked up mean or bloodthirsty as a hindrance through play, maybe through no fault of your own. You failed a freaking fear roll, and oh look, I gain a hindrance. I gain bloodthirsty. Whenever I see X, I spring into a rage and have to destroy all of them. Whether it's I see muggers and I have to attack, or I see a thief and I have to kill them. You can have a lot of different things that lead to that, where it's appropriate for the player character to slaughter and be the murder hobo. What I think the morality question needs to come down to is, do we need a mechanic that tells the player how they're supposed to play their character? Or do we need a mechanic that lets the player choose how to play their character and then rewards them for doing so?
I think probably the latter is probably the better solution overall. I mean, let's take a look at a couple of failed attempts in role-playing games in general to kind of enforce morality and humanity and acting morally. D&D, the whole alignment system, just does it work? Or is it just clunky trying to, browbeat players into, oh, you can't do that, for arguments about, no, I'm chaotic neutral. I do whatever I want. I'm neutral. I'm a chaotic about it.
Or
the pinnacle idea of the character concept being the paladin. That to me is a kind of a very moral character class to play, to be put into that game.
I think people try to play their alignment and try to play that type of character, but it just has a tendency to just kind of go off the rails. I mean, we've got somebody in our group right now who is, in my opinion, no matter what character this person's playing, it's chaotic or chaotic evil. And this player's like, oh yeah, I'm a good, or I'm a neutral good. And I'm like, no, you're not. But the person is shoehorned into having to pick an alignment because it's a 5e game. And maybe if that alignment wasn't there and that fluid flexibility was there, none of us would have a problem with some of the things she's doing. But we're in our mind saying, okay, she's saying that I'm good or chaotic good, but doing just the opposite. And it's, it's just kind of, I don't know. I think if you didn't have alignment, we wouldn't have those particular issues.
Well, I think it's also important to point out too that it really is. It's, God, I hate to say it too, because it's a session 0. I don't want to go down that kind of wormhole again, but it's not necessarily session 0. I think as a GM and player, you need to have an actual conversation about, is morality one of the themes that we want to explore? Does it fit the tone of the game world we're playing in? For example, the title of this podcast episode, Better Angels, is also the series finale of the 2nd season of The Walking Dead. And it's and morality in that game and humanity and remaining civil and being the better part of yourself, not devolving into a bloodthirsty savage that kills people on sight, and making those decisions about, we can't just kill people because because the numbers say it's the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do. We have to do it, but there has to be another way to do it. That is part and parcel of the whole Walking Dead genre and tone. Morality what you're willing to do, how far you're willing to go to survive, and what boundaries you're willing to cross are part and parcel of that story. So it fits in a walking if you're playing a zombie apocalypse survival horror game. It absolutely fits. If your character is supposed to be crusaders in a historical, period piece, morality should probably have some impetus in that game. But it doesn't necessarily mean that across the board there should be morality. I would say that supers is another area where there should probably be almost goody two shoe Boy Scout-esque morality.
So I think if you look at like superheroes, it all depends on the age. If we're talking the golden age of comics, well, I mean, the comic code was in place, and like you couldn't show violence against women, you couldn't show violence against children, you couldn't show, there were so many things that, like, because this was a product made by good, upstanding men for children, you weren't allowed to do a lot of stuff in kind of the 50s and 60s, that golden age of comics.
Right.
Whereas now, if you look at like modern day comics, Superman snaps the neck of his rival and kills him, slaughtering, 100 people in 3 buildings to save the small family off to one side who the general was going to kill with his heat vision. So I think you have this dichotomy of, it depends on the story you're trying to tell, it depends on what you're trying to conceive as to what level of morality you want to capture. But we were talking about this in the green room. I mean, Triple Ace Games said, for a pulp game, if in your head you know that Doc Savage, Flash Gordon, or Indiana Jones wouldn't do it, then it's a bad act. And if your character does it, the GM takes away a Benny. Just, bam, here's the rule. When you commit a bad act, not a vile act, not an evil act, a bad act, you lose a Benny. If you lose your last Benny, you can't earn any more Bennies the rest of the session. It doesn't matter if you spent 2 and you only had the 1 to lose. If you lose your last Benny, you can't earn any more Bennies that session, regardless of what you do, because you were bad. That is a massive ruler across the knuckles, stick to teach you not to be bad. But it's used because in that particular setting, you're trying to capture that Indiana Jones, the good guys are good, the bad guys are bad. The black hats versus the white hats thing. Because that's a central part of the story you're telling, it makes a lot of sense to kind of put the player characters on notice. You can't do these things at all. By the flip side, if we're playing in a morally gray survival, zombie apocalypse, without me giving away a brand new mechanic that's in playtesting, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to tell player characters, you can't murder an innocent person for your own personal survival. In fact, it makes a lot more sense to say, there's a benefit and a consequence to do exactly that. Mm-hmm. You can choose to save yourself, but there might be some consequences to that. You can choose to save others. The consequence to that is you put yourself in direct mortal danger to rush in and save somebody from a zombie who with 1 bite can kill you.
Right. Well, let's take a look at, like, I just want to hold up Shane as a character example of somebody who started out as a morally upright guy. He was a cop, serve and protect, and then just gradually over time started making letting morals kind of slip out of the way, and eventually was going to murder his own best friend. I mean, it's one of those things. And here's the thing too: you have to know your audience and your players too. If they're not interested in exploring that, then don't put that on them. I mean, at all.
That goes back to the conversation you didn't want to have, which is have that conversation before the campaign starts and set the tone, both that you expect and that the players expect. That way you kind of know is this a game where we're going to play with morality? No, and that is no different than choosing whether or not your version of the Old West women don't have the right to vote and aren't given an equal voice. It's no different than saying we're playing a 1970s game, but you know what? None of us want to deal with racism, so there's no racism in the game. Doesn't matter that it actually existed in the 70s. We're going to play a version of the 70s where everyone's equal. You know, you can have those decisions before play and decide what the tone of your game is going to be. And you can decide, well, the good guys are really good and the bad guys are really bad. Or you can decide, no, I really, really want to see gray.
But I say plan on that maybe not working so well, even if you have that conversation. It's great to say, but I would say just be prepared that as a GM and players, you may think that that's all exactly what you want, but as you start moving through the game, you may decide, you know, maybe we'll be a little looser with some of this stuff and be okay with that.
Well, let's talk about that. So if we all sit around as a group and we're saying, okay, we're going to play this style of game. These are the themes that we want to explore in the game, and everybody's in agreement, and everybody goes, yeah, I'm in. Even if they don't believe what they're saying or don't mean it, your job at the table as a GM is to enforce it.
Yeah, I guess so. Hold them accountable.
And go, hey, we all said we want to do this thing. Well, here it is.
I disagree only with the enforce it. It's your job to include it. But if someone chooses, you know, halfway through to go, I didn't really understand or I don't really agree with this, I don't want to play with that mechanic, that's when it's appropriate to have that, okay, bring the game to a stop and ask everybody as a group to kind of make a decision. Hey, are we all okay letting this go because it makes so-and-so uncomfortable? Are you okay with playing partway there? You know, find that spot that works for your group. These aren't, no, your player agreed to it, so they're contractually obligated until the end of time to play by these rules. We're not saying that. What we're saying is it's your job that once everybody says, I'm on board with playing morality, and then the paladin slaughters an innocent, it's your job to then put a guise on the paladin to atone for slaughtering someone. And maybe they lose access to edges or they lose access to their arcane background because their god no longer answers their call because they just committed an unholy act.
Yeah, and there's other parts of that too. I mean, it's the agreed upon rules of play that you guys set down to agree to play with. I mean, it's the same thing as if the GM suddenly goes, "Oh no, extras can soak wounds." What? Oh no, extras can soak wounds because I want this to be more challenging. I don't want extras that have to follow the rules of the game. They seem too restrictive. No. Hold on. We all said we're out agreed to play by these rules. I think there's a little bit of that. I think that when things go off the tracks and go sideways, I think a lot of GMs are really nervous or anxious about going, hey, I thought we agreed this was going to happen in the game. I don't think a lot of GMs have that conversation when it happens.
No, I agree. I agree
kind
completely.
of look the other way and go, oh, God, this is uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really not comfortable with this, but I don't want to say anything. I don't want to confront my player.
To be fair, I think that's two parts. One is the non-confrontational nature of being...
Of Chris?
Shall we say socially inept gamers? Because we're socially adapted to other gamers and in the little like nerd geek community we have, but you put a gamer in a position to actually be social with like non-gamers, it kind of falls apart real quick. That said, the second part of that is it's hard to stand on a decision that was made if no decision was ever discussed. It's GMs who didn't have that conversation, assumed that just saying we're playing a superhero game set a moral tone, and then when someone plays outside that, they don't have that, but this is what we agreed. Instead, it's this is what I expected. And that's not stone to stand on when you have that secondary conversation. Right. With that said, let's backtrack for a second, and I want to dive into the alignment question a little bit more. Are alignments falling apart not because the players aren't playing them, but because the expectation is that you'll never take an act outside of that narrow window?
Maybe, and that's too restrictive.
See, and I think that's the reason, like, Savage Worlds players, you don't have that. You have, well, I have the mean hindrance. So occasionally I have to be kind of nasty. And we've even talked about this kind of ad nauseum of the overplaying that so that they're mean with literally everything that they ever put into roleplay. Is it the same with the D&D thing where, oh, I'm lawful good, therefore single thing I ever do, I must be the shining paragon of the city and uphold the laws of justice and truth, or fucking hell, occasionally Superman lies.
Exactly. Have fun.
Everyone about the fact he's Clark Kent.
Well, let me ask this. What is the expectation of the mechanic? What are GMs instructed to do with the mechanic? Are they instructed to punish players when they step outside that narrow line?
Well, it doesn't matter though. If as a group we're all looking at that as this narrow window through which you're allowed to act, it doesn't matter if there's a mechanic to reward you or a mechanic to punish you. We're all still going to see the player's behavior as unacceptable because their character's acts weren't within that window. And that's what I'm wondering, if that's why the D&D alignment system feels so broken to a lot of us that have moved on to games like Savage Worlds, and why even we as GMs on this show have to tell people, look, I know you took arrogant. That doesn't mean you're an asshole to everyone in the game acting like you're better than literally everyone you run into. It just means you attack the biggest guy on the battlefield first. Right. That's the only effect it's supposed to have. It doesn't mean you have to be an asshole.
Right. You have a chip on your shoulder and something to prove. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We talk about we discuss it all the time with mean and taking the hindrances literally. And I think the same can be said for 5e alignments. If you take them too literally, then yes, if you're lawful good, you should never do anything that is outside that alignment. And if you do, you should get a newspaper to the nose. But how fun is that, and how good a gaming is that? I don't think it's going to be that much fun or that great of gaming. You're gonna be bored and irritated. And
well, I don't necessarily disagree. I just want to add something that if you have the flip side of this coin is not just are players not playing right. Are they not role playing their character the right way? It's not necessarily about that. It's about the story and the conflict and the drama that rises out of characters and odds. So when you have the lawful good paladin going, no, we can't steal that. That isn't ours. Then you have to have the chaotic good thief going, yeah, but we're kind of doing a Robin Hood thing. So it kind of works, right? And having that interplay between, well, I see it this way. The world is black and white, good or evil. No, they have another character go, no, there's shades of gray.
Yeah.
We're not hurting nobody. And that's where I think morality is missing in role-playing games. Not as a mechanic to punish players for bad acts, more than anything else, just to put players in an interparty, creates a little bit of interparty conflict. Oh, well, okay, so crap, we can't let the goody good tissue guy know we're going to torture this guy. And you see this in role-playing games all the time. Like, hey, Paladin, why don't you go out and check the horses while we do something completely evil that we don't want you to witness doing because we don't want to deal with it. But I think at the end of the day, I don't think that the alignment system really works the way it was intended to. And I think the biggest problem that players have with it, they're playing with it, and GMs, is when the player makes a decision that is ludicrously overbounds like, we're gonna slaughter this entire orphanage to get to this demon. What? It's ludicrous that you would wait a minute, hold on, there's got to be another way. Nope, we're going in, guns and spells blazing, we're killing everything that stands. There's more than one way to solve that problem, and I think that's kind of where it's when it goes way too far, swings way too far to the left of a lawful good character doing these hideously murderous things and going, what? Don't tell me how to play. Don't step on my agency, man.
Well, there's that. There's also if you have a mechanic in place that tries to force this, one, just realize you cannot legislate morality. You just can't do it. But if I put a mechanic in place that says, if you act outside of X window, all that player is going to do is have their character stand aside while the other player character does the evil act that they wanted to do, but their morality that they chose on their character sheet doesn't allow. They'll just turn a blind eye to it happening. And then you end up with that, well, do I punish you because you let it happen? And that becomes another issue with the whole, if you try to put a mechanic in place for this. That's why it's not an easy fix from a game standpoint. It really does take that evolution of us as a gaming community to be a group that actually wants to role play that. And Jared, you mentioned it causes inter-party conflict. No, I don't think it does. I think it causes inter-party drama.
Yeah.
And drama is the thing that is missing from our games right now. Is when we role play, we have our character talk in a silly voice to a vendor or something of that nature. We're not actually exploring moments of drama. We're exploring comical moments that have nothing to do with our dice rolls, which is also why you see people have the huge backlash to the idea of having to make perception rolls and persuasion rolls and things that should be automatic because they're part of the story, and then the mechanic gets in the way. That's why we see so much of that dichotomy in the community of, but I don't want my character to have to roll to see if he spots the clue. I don't want my character to have to roll to see if my soliloquy I just delivered for the last 5 minutes lands on the ear properly. You know, it doesn't matter how good an orator I am. Maybe my character stutters every third word and speaks broken English. I need to make a knowledge language check or a persuasion check to see if that actually was translated through to the target. And that becomes an issue with players because they don't want to have that drama, that moment of you can't even talk to the people around you.
Yeah, I think drama is missing from it too. Like another one that I hear a lot of complaints about is White Wolf's original Vampire the Masquerade, the humanity mechanic. Because I mean, the idea of that game as it's presented is you're supposed to be broody, angst-ridden. Oh my God, I'm a horrible, soulless monster. It's trying to cling to whatever little humanity I have left. Nope, I'm a blood-powered superhero. It's how people want to play it. And the GM just screw humanity, frenzy, no. And I think there's a big part of that experience, specifically with Vampire the Masquerade, that's being left out at the table because people aren't on board with hey, let's try the humanity, even if it's not a perfect system. You just bringing it to bear is part of hey, you need to be conscious of this. And then also too, you have to keep up the masquerade. You can't let society know that vampires exist.
Normals can't know that you exist.
Right. And accursed has something kind of like that, where you have that battle of, are you gonna go more to your I will say human side versus your beast side. And you've got that push and pull coming into play in Accursed. I don't, unfortunately, I've played it a few times and I don't have the rule in front of me and I don't remember what it's called, but it just, when you were saying the humanity, it just kind of popped into my mind that Accursed does have something very similar.
Yeah. It can be fun watching. It can be fun to role play a character from a player standpoint who starts off moral and just becomes the bad guy. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with you have to be the same moral character you start off as. I think there can be, there's some room for that. But I just think overall that morality as a part of the game, an intrinsic part of the game, is missing at a lot of tables.
And I think, unfortunately, part of the problem with that is if we look at the way Savage Worlds is written, there's a really great morality mechanic that's never used, and it's built into Miracles. Arcane Background Miracles specifically says if the character commits a sin, they start having these problems. There's this entire sins portion of that arcane background that's written in there. But it's not specific because they wanted to leave it open so that your GM could define what the sins were for the god your character follows. And in every game I've ever played, there's never been a list of sins. Not once.
And maybe that's something you want to spend a little bit of time, if you're going to have a person playing that, maybe that's something you have a little bit of time before the game starts, and you sit down with that player and come up with that list together.
Yeah, it's all part of, like we said, it's all part of session 0. Have an adult conversation if you want to play that role. And I'm not the comic book guy, so let me just ask this: what is the superimposed morality on Batman? If we look at the Dark Knight version,
like the TV version of Batman, the old Adam West Batman, like he never cursed, he never killed, he always hit people with a blunt object or an open fist. I don't even think he ever actually did the full closed fist. I think it was always that half fist thing.
Right.
He didn't do the karate chops like we saw in Star Trek, but he absolutely I don't think he ever did the full closed fist. It was like that little knuckle fist, kind of a half fist. And maybe that was just Adam West didn't make a fist when he was throwing punches on set. But, you had this really, really golden age of comics kind of a morality system in place for him in that show. And then you get to the latest version of Batman, and he's running people over with his car, and he's using razor sharp batarangs that sink, 3 inches into wood when they're thrown at that. He's killing people.
Well, is he killing innocents though? Is there a moral code to Batman?
Well, we've never seen Batman even so much as quote unquote injure an innocent on purpose. You'll oftentimes see through inaction, we see that he's allowed someone to come to injury, and then he gets all morose and
collateral damage.
And there's collateral damage. But the big thing to look at is, quote unquote, he's not killing, he's incapacitating them all. The problem is when anyone with any knowledge of how the human body works watches this, there's no interaction that Batman has with a bad guy that doesn't end up with multiple broken bones in the body. And, we're talking a 6, 8, maybe 10-week stay in the hospital minimum.
Right. But within the confines of the universe that the comic books are in, though, he's kind of an anti-hero, right? He's not necessarily playing by the society's rules, but he's not a bad guy.
So Batman is supposed to be the foil for Superman. You've got Superman as kind of this embodiment of the true all-American Boy Scout version of morality. The good guys are good, the bad guys are bad, and then Batman has always been the foil to that. He's the realistic hero. He's that hero. He's not the hero we want, but he's the hero we deserve. He's going to actually get stuff done, but The problem that always comes with that is it, again, is very tied to the era, who's writing him and stuff like that. Supposedly, Batman's thing is he will never use a gun and he will not kill. Those are his two quote-unquote kind of set in stone. Those are the rules of Batman. They get broken pretty widely depending on who's writing them. You know, we see him use grenade launchers. We've seen him use a gun in the most recent movie. So it really just depends on who's writing it.
Yeah, but I think Batman's a good example, especially the darker, grittier versions. If you want to play like, you know, the late 90s kind of anti-superhero, kind of gritty, street level.
Yeah, the Nolan stuff.
Yeah. And it still comes into play, right? I mean, he still has it. Would you argue that the alter ego and identity is sort of a protection against the law? He's not necessarily working on the side of law enforcement, right? I mean,
Batman is hated by law enforcement, depending on who you talk to. You know, even probably one of the quote unquote kind of quintessential versions of Batman for the modern audience is the animated series that ran for fucking ever and had Mark Hamill as the Joker and whatnot. That is kind of the version of Batman that most people know. And in that we see that while the commissioner is on his side, the lead detective literally thinks he's the cause of crime in the city. You know, the lead detective takes on kind of a J. Jonah Jameson hating of Spider-Man role toward Batman to show that, no, this is a vigilante. He's ever since he came in, the criminals had to go out and get bigger guns. You know, we see that escalation because there's this super weapon in town that is Batman. Then the bad guys start becoming supers as well. Things like that. You see that kind of that level step kind of a thing. With that said, while comics makes for an interesting take on it, the problem that comics comes is comics are very much your of the moment morality tale. So the author at the time is going to take their version of the hero and then tweak it to tell some story about whatever is happening at the time that comic's written. Sure. I think, you know, if we're going to talk morality tales, it's better to use kind of your more archetypical characters, like your Robin Hood characters. You know, take a look at Robin Hood versus Will Scarlet. You know, Robin Hood is your upright, nobles must act for the good of the people. I've been made an outlaw, therefore I'm going to do outlaw things to help the people. Whereas Will Scarlet is more the, I'm just a thief, dude. I would really like to eat tonight.
Right. Okay. Do we want to? Is there anything in the chat that we want to discuss before we close it down?
Ruben had asked a question pretty early on about whether or not any of us have kind of an epic fail moment to tell, either from the GM or player perspective. I will tell mine first. It's from years ago, let's say, without giving away my age too much, at least 20. I was playing D&D at the time, and I was playing a neutral good paladin of a different god. GM had rewritten the rules a little bit to have paladins of any god, and that just meant you had to match that god's alignment. And my character, in his very first mission, steps into a dungeon and sees a person stirring a pot with a bone. And in my head, I heard stirring a pot with a human bone. So I drop the shield in front of me and shield charge the cook and turn him into pate against the back wall because I rolled a natural 20, backed it up with a natural 20, and did all the damage ever to a guy that had like 2 hit points. You know, and instantly, first combat, my paladin became a fighter because I had just broke the tenet of my god and committed murder. And then the entire campaign from that point forward was my character regaining his powers, and the rest of the party was kind of along for the hellish ride. But it was this moment where, as a player, I was seeing the thing I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to write evil. And then I assumed that the GM's description was of something evil. And it wasn't. It was of something that looked evil. And I didn't bother to use my powers to detect evil. I didn't bother to use what the character's capabilities to determine if I was supposed to react. I just chose as a player to instantly react and to react hard. And I didn't try to pull my punches or anything. I was whooping and hollering and so happy I rolled all those 20s. And then, bam, I was suddenly punished really badly.
How about you, Chris?
You know, again, the player that I was talking about earlier, you know, who has the lawful good, but then ended up killing basically a sailor who was really, really scared. I can't even, it was so far back, I can't even remember exactly what was going on, but he's coming down the stairs at the bottom of the ship. She jumps out because he's already freaking out, scares him, then trips him. He falls, hits his head on the stairs as he's bouncing down and dies. And we're like, what are you doing? He was just trying to get down here because he was scared. And that the excuses just started pouring out about, but I did this, I didn't mean to do this, I didn't mean to do that. And I'm like, oh, and so we gave that person shit for ever, still to this day, about lawful good, huh?
I think mine comes on the heels of you got a group of players who are rescued from almost certain death in the zombie apocalypse by a helicopter. They all allegedly had heroic and loyal as hindrances. They get aboard the chopper that saves them without asking any questions. They just see them as citizen survivors and start to fly, back to a military base. Mid-flight, the pilot suffers a heart attack, starts having a heart attack. The player's reaction, and I shit you not, which surprised the hell out of me when they did it, they immediately go, I rush up, unleash his four-way harness, and parkour, kick him out the door, and fall into the pilot's seat. In a helicopter with armed soldiers, and then proceed to battle the armed soldiers for control of the helicopter. To this day, I could not wrap my head around it. And even when I asked, whoa, what the hell are you doing? We're securing this helicopter. They just rescued your asses. How is that heroic?
It's ours now.
Well,
but of course they were taking him somewhere evil in the helicopter. They just didn't tell him that.
I mean, depends on your definition of evil. It was dead end, so everything was evil.
Right.
But, so I think there's a flip side to that coin, though, too, Jared. Another dead end story of a character who had heroic and loyal and was forced by the mechanics of the game to run away instead of saving a small child because he failed a fear check. Which is what caused you and I to go, wait a minute, the fear rules don't work for us anymore. Because in that case, what the character would naturally take as the priority was made secondary to a game mechanic. So just as players can epically fail, just as players or GMs can epically fail, so can the rules themselves. And that's why we have so much control as a GM and as designers to say, well, wait a minute. If this rule doesn't work, let's jettison the rule and put in something that does.
Right. Is a random, here's the thing, too. Is a random reaction to fear suitable for your game? If it works in your game, yeah. If fear is a big factor in your game, probably not. You probably want the player and the character himself to be in control of their reaction. It should have a mechanical consequence when they fail, absolutely, but they should be in control of their role play action.
Yeah, I think that is one of those quintessential things that belongs in a setting rule in Savage Worlds. Especially when we start talking about morality specifically, is really stop and think about how does this affect your game? Does having all player characters count as unarmed defenders, or all characters count as an unarmed defender whenever they're fighting with just their bare hands? Does that make sense in your game if you're trying to do the pulp-fisted style game where they're supposed to be charging people with weapons and knocking the weapon out of their hand so they can have a proper fist fight? Well, then no, they shouldn't be at a penalty, to their parry because they chose to rush in, because now you're penalizing them for the exact type of behavior you've kind of set the expectation for. We had that in our Wild Wild West game where the idea was, yeah, there are guns, but you're kind of supposed to get into fist fights most of the time. And the only way you can do that is by don't penalize a player for doing the thing you expect them to do. Right. Kind of like we use Benny's as a dog treat to get players to do those things.
Right.
To don't put a stinger in place that's going to make it difficult to do the thing you're expecting them to do.
Right, and that's just top level Savage Worlds. Look at what you're playing, and ask yourself: do all of these rules fit? And if they don't, amend them, or just replace them, or kick them out entirely. Like the other thing, if you're trying to play Indiana Jones, high fist, blah 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 blah, and Indiana Jones is supposed to plow through 15 non-essential henchmen or mooks, and Savage Worlds, don't give them wounds at all. Don't give the extra wounds at all. Just shake and knocks them out. They're done. And they shakes them, they're basically out. They're incapacitated. Why? Because that encourages the player to storm in and just wail on mooks with his bare fists.
Yeah,
without worrying about being injured.
Yeah, call it glass jaw or something, and everyone that they shake is immediately taken out of the combat.
Right.
They're just knocked out.
Right.
Another reason followers is is a not followers. What's the word I'm looking for? Where the henchman jumps in and takes the wound. It's in core. No, it's in core Savage Worlds.
Yeah, it's I believe it's called Zealots, and it's the idea that the henchman will jump in front of the villain anytime he would take mortal wounds.
Yeah, it's not called Zealot. You got the rule right, but the name's not right. And it's bugging me. But anyway, it's in there. Take a look at the setting rules. And that's not what we're discussing.
To be fair, my head is freaking full of like 2 different versions of the core rules, right, and a jump start and a setting that's coming out next year. And I might be a little overwhelmed at this moment with what I have in my head.
Yeah.
So
I just announced.
Let's go ahead and close the show down with an announcement. We are officially releasing the first Atomic Ninja Studios Savage Worlds licensee product, Savage Daddy's One Shot Wonders. It's a collection of 5 individual one-shot adventures, complete with pre-gens.
Might be a zombie game.
Could be. Take a look, and it'll be available on drive-thru next Tuesday.
Nice.
And then look for the upcoming Dead End Jeb start.
And, just throw it out there. The same layout guy that did the new Suede, when you get that, is the guy that did ours. Carl Kiesler is amazing, and he laid that book out so fantastically. I really, really can't wait to see the community reaction to what he's done, because, look, we put a lot of effort into designing this stuff. When we handed it to Carl, even we got excited when we got it back.
Guess who's doing layout for SWAT? I bet you can't guess.
Could be Carl, could it?
It might be.
Everybody in the licensee community that I know personally, I have suggested, hey, get a hold of Carl. He's got reasonable rates.
and we get enough people, out there having him do layout. Maybe he can make this a full-time job.
I'm gonna give him an official nice. I'm gonna give him an official title. I'm gonna start now calling him Carl the Machine Kessler.
Oh, absolutely.
The man is a machine.
Okay, but does that mean that he has to do all the layout without a shirt on?
I love that you went with a Kreischer reference.
That's awesome.
I'm the machine.
Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and shut down the show. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris Savage Bobby Fox, Dave the Rules Maven Scott saying keep rolling, stay savage.